The film must have been being made in 1948. Was it the first film that you worked on when you were at Shepperton?
No. I joined there when I was 14 years of age, and I was a messenger boy for best part of a year or more. And then I graduated into the cutting rooms. I became a very junior assistant, mostly coding, using the numbering machine to code the film.
Right.
And it just so happened I worked with Jack Drake, who was the sound editor on The Third Man, and I became a junior assistant, second assistant editor on the sound side.
So were you working for Shepperton at that time, or were you some sort of freelance?
I guess I was working for Shepperton. I was working for Shepperton, or Sir Alexander Korda, of course, owned Shepperton Studios and ran it, so I was indirectly working for Sir Alexander Korda.
So were you like seconded from the rubber numbering department then?
No, I think I got promoted. I mean, I just, I'd been numbering for a while, and a vacancy occurred, and I got the job.
Were there other people who were your age, 15 or 16, doing that sort of work? Was that quite normal?
It was really, because, I mean, people, the industry was sort of recovering from the war, and, they needed young blood, they needed new, people to come in. A lot of the people who were experienced filmmakers have been in the war, and they came back, and hopefully many of them came back, and they seemed to, and they encouraged all the youngsters, to go from being office boys and what have you into various departments.
Yeah.
And it just so happened I was lucky enough to go into the editing rooms. And from editing, of course, it's very important, a part of filmmaking, and it helps you to become a director.
Mm.
You know what is required, hopefully,
Yes.
most of the time.
You told me about an incident where the editor left some nitrite film over the light source on his viewing machine.
Well, the editing machines we used to use in those days, a Moviola, had a sound head, a separate sound head, which had had an exciter lamp enclosed.
Right, because it was optical sound.
Metal.
So it was optical sound.
Optical sound, absolutely. Right. And this used to generate a lot of heat. Mm. And I have a feeling that was probably the source of the fire when we had a big fire there. Ozzy Haftenrichter, we all used to do it. We'd drape the film over the exciter lamp while we did one thing or another, where it's very easy to forget. And where he left the room or what have you, we lost quite a few reels of cutting copy.
You told me 8 reels.
I think it was about that. And one of the assistants on the film, Jeff Bottrell, was a very good editing assistant, and used to meticulously code the film, right, and log it in a book. So his notes were absolutely amazingly accurate, and
so they could
instrumental in us reprinting the film from the original negative, which was, of course, stored in London at Humphreys Film Laboratories.
So you had to then renumber, presumably, selected rushes.
Oh yes, I earned quite a lot of money as for a young kid anyway, because I was working so many hours, catching up with the numbering of all the reprints that came in.
Yeah.
And I used to work quite late at night, which I'm sure was against the law for a junior. I was about 15 at the time. And so I would go on numbering, through the night. Then the company used to send a Rolls Royce to pick me up from my home, where I used to go home, and they wanted urgent reprints numbered, they would send a Rolls Royce to pick me up, and all the neighbours used to look through the curtains and thinking, "What? I wonder what's happened to that boy. I think he's made it."
So whose Rolls Royce would that have been?
Well, it was just a company that was hired.
Oh, really? They sent a Rolls Royce?
Yeah, Rolls Royce.
Down Green Lane.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. And at the time, was The Third Man considered to be a special film, or was it to everybody? Was it just another movie going through the studio?
No, it was always a special film because Carol Reed, who was the director, was a very famous director.
So he was already famous.
Oh yes, very tall, good-looking man, absolutely perfect gentleman.
What was
fact?
Tell me about his appearance. Was he very dapper? Or was
he was very well dressed. They used to. It's so different to today. The directors in those days, they used to come in with wear a lounge suit, with a tie, collar and tie, and always a trilby hat. They usually wore trilby hats in those days.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the reasons why he slanted the camera for the close shots on various actors to accommodate the trilby hat,
Right.
Yeah.
I think you said on one of your Bonds, Living Daylights, that when you shot in Vienna.
I did. I shot in almost the same location that Carol Reed shot in, and I did toy with the idea of canting the camera at the same angle that Carol Reed had used, but in the end I decided against it. It was...
I think it would have been a nice little homage.
It probably would have been, yeah.
And
my people weren't wearing trilby hats, so it wasn't a valid reason to do it, really.
So Guy Hamilton, did you get to meet Guy on the film, or had he finished?
He was assistant director to Carol.
Right.
And I think he had occasion to throw me off the set a couple of times, because I used to go and sort of, as a kid does, go and watch what's going on out of curiosity.
Yeah.
And he did several films as assistant director. And I don't know, I shouldn't think for one moment he remembered me, but eventually, of course, he was a very successful James Bond director.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling me when I met him in Paris once, that he said...
So that was years later.
He said he was responsible for finding Anton Karas, who was the
zither player.
The zither player, yes. And he was a street musician, apparently. He said he was the one who discovered this chap and suggested it to Carol Reed.
Yeah. At Shepperton, I recall there's a photograph on the wall of Anton Karas alone in a soundstage, looking up at a screen with a still from The Third Man. Did he record at Shepperton? Do you know?
When he first came over, it was difficult because it would have created a few problems at the studio with the unions.
Right, if he'd gone out and worked there.
Yes, but eventually, of course, I think they did come to some arrangement, and they were able to record properly at the studio.
Okay.
I was given the task of going up to Carol Reed's house in Chelsea and running the film on a moviola for Anton Karas to actually design his music for the film.
And did he do that in a detailed sort of way, or did he just view the scenes and just come up with tunes that then could be fitted in?
I think that what it was, most of the tunes were folk music, if you like, Austrian folk music, and he adapted them for the film.
Okay, so they may have existed before the film rather than being special.
So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and he didn't speak any English, I understand.
No, and I didn't speak any German. No, we got on very well.
Excellent.
It was quite an amusing incident because I brought this what we call a moviola. It's a film editing machine which you can run the sound and the action on this machine, and it's quite a powerful machine, shall we say.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was brought up from the Shepperton Studios to Carol Reed's house, and the butler came down and helped me plug the machine into his electrical system. And the moment that I pressed the pedal, of course, it blew all the fuses in the house. So I was struggling around in the pantry to find the fuse box, and eventually I found the fuse box, and I replaced the fuse wire. And I'm no electrician, by the way, but of course it immediately blew again. I think the machine was too powerful for the system.
Right.
And so I said to the butler, "Have you got a nail?" I put a nail
in Carol Reed's house.
Yeah, and years later I used to walk past that house and I used to think, I wonder if that nail's still in the fuse box.
So not only did the cutting copy catch on fire, the director's house and director and composer might have been lost.
I was quite surprised when I went up to the lounge, invited up there for drinks. You know, they were young children at the time, I suppose.
Yeah.
His children, and they had a pet rabbit, and the pet rabbit used to sit like munching a cabbage on this very expensive settee, which I thought was quite amazing, really. It was a very nice house, and because Carol Reed was a very successful director.
Yeah.
He was an absolute gentleman, and he would come down and ask me if, or the butler would probably ask me if Carol had said, would I like a glass of sherry in the morning? And I was only a kid, and I didn't really drink sherry. I might have started drinking a few glasses of beer, but I politely declined.
So would you have met, well, you probably wouldn't have met Orson Welles. Was Orson Welles around?
Well, yeah, Orson Welles was around the studio and what have you, and you know, apart from filming, there's always post-production work where you have to replace the dialogue and stuff. So, you know, he appeared in the studio at Shepperton.
I suppose, though, during the shooting, he only really had a few scenes, didn't he?
Yeah, he was very much a shadowy mystery figure in the film.
So Joseph Cotton presumably would have been around because he was in the heart.
Yeah, Joseph Cotton as well. But strangely enough, with going back to Orson Welles, years later I was working on a film that we were doing some post-production work at RCA Hammersmith, and there I did meet Orson Welles. Actually,
really?
he came in he was working on a film that he'd been making for several years. I'm trying to think what it was called now, but it was I think it was a Shakespearean film set in Denmark.
Yeah, Macbeth.
Macbeth. And he had trouble actually making that film. You know, he ran out of money, and then it went on and on. I think eventually he did finish the film, but
When he was doing those commercials, he did sherry commercials, didn't he?
Yes, that's right.
Your friend John Mackey.
My friend John Mackey, who produced commercials. He did some very successful commercials with Orson Welles.
And you ended up, I think, doing the footsteps for Joseph Cotton.
Well, I was more or less the same stature as Joseph Cotton, and working with Jack Drake, the sound editor. You know, we needed to have all the footsteps for Joseph Cotton when he was running around Vienna.
Yeah.
In those days, we didn't have specialist footstep artists, so it was generally members of the cutting room staff used to do the hoofing. The facilities weren't like they are today. Like pressing a switch and you get an instant echo effect.
Right.
You had to actually record it in that situation.
Really?
Where you had an echoey sound. So I would watch the loop several times and then go back, and the sound recorders would get the sound camera, and then I would immediately go outside into the stairwell, which was very echoey, and I would, from memory, I would try and reproduce the footsteps that I'd seen on the screen. It required a little editing to make it fit properly with the actual physical footsteps.
Yeah.
But in those days, of course, we were working on optical sound.
Okay.
And every time you made a cut to make the adjustment of the footsteps, you would get a click,
Right.
which was unacceptable. So I also came into my own because I had a very steady hand, and I was very good at what we call blooping, where you actually paint the join mark out with a tapered ink, a special ink that was made for it for that purpose.
Yeah.
So that the join didn't go click; it just disappeared into infinity and then came out again.
That's like quick fade to silence and back within a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And so, who would have done Orson Welles' footsteps? Those famous ones where he runs up the street and the silhouettes.
I honestly remember probably one other person in the colour, or it could have even been me.
Well, I think it's time for bed. So
yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Nick.
Okay.